Okay, ladies and gentlemen, once again, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone to Project Inspire 2025. So we're going to try something a little bit different this year, and that is as follows. I want everyone in the room, for the sake of the people watching at home, all 23,811 of you, I'd like you all for exactly 60 seconds to close your eyes. We'll do this for 30 seconds. 30 seconds for those with ADD. 30 seconds, I want you to close your eyes, and I really genuinely want you to think of a moment in time when you were genuinely happy. And you can't do this with your eyes open. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created that your senses are accentuated if you close down some of the others. So I want you to close your eyes. Mamish, do this. I'm telling you, I've done this at Harvard. I've done this around the world. It works. Close your eyes for 30 seconds. I want you to absolutely imagine in your mind's eye that moment when you were just genuinely happy. Sipuk. Okay, eyes open. I want you to raise your right hand if whatever you're imagining, you're with people. There's other people involved in the imagination, whatever. Okay, just beautiful. Make sure the camera's good. Okay, and left hand, those of you who are completely alone. That's very interesting because the alones are very, very few. The findings, my friends, of the Harvard study, which is the longest longevity study ever done on happiness, over 85 years, basically concluded as follows. The things that make you most happy are not things. They're people. The core of happiness, and we're going to define it today, revolves around relationships. And that's why when I've done this all over the world, almost at least 90% of the people, when they think of that moment of happiness, there's somebody around, there's somebody with people. So the key part of understanding happiness is relationships. So by now, I think it's public knowledge, so I don't have to be too self-conscious about it. So I happen to represent the biggest YouTuber in the world. On average, this person gets about 100 to 107 million views per post. Now, I've worked with this person for several years, which means that I have literally a seat at the table with the largest focus group of Gen Z. That's our target audience. When we were going to one meeting after another, everyone wants to get into Gen Z. It's the next generation. It's the future. They're huge consumers. If you take Gen Z and millennials together, 10 years from now, they're going to make up 41% of the consumer public, people spending money. So it's a very important cohort. So I realized I'm sitting, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put me, you can't possibly make this stuff up. Put me, if you could just keep phones off on Shabbos, put me in the most crazy situation. So I said there must be a reason for it. Possibly the one reason is to really understand this generation. So we did some research. Now it's very difficult when you do research on minors. If you understand the law in this country, a person under the age, legally, under the age of 21, you really need their guardian or their parents' consent before you ask them certain questions. So we had to use a certain technique using pixels. I don't know if there's tech whizzes in the audience. I don't know, it's Elon Musk here or Sergey. So we had to find out what is the major pain points of Gen Z. What's bothering this generation? And it's fair to say we had a captive audience, I think, of one of the largest possible focus groups of people between the ages of roughly 13 to about 20. What do you think? And you'll see the connection between the longest study ever done at Harvard said at the end of the day, happiness is tied into relationships. And then there's a second factor, which I learned firsthand by being at the table with the biggest YouTube on planet Earth. What do you guys think the number one pain point, the number one point why this is by far the most anxious generation. Never before in the history of the United States has there been as much teenage suicide, as much prescription drugs being dispensed for anxiety and depression. These kids are in trouble. What do you think the number one pain point is? And I'll give you a clue. It's got something to do with the reason why you're at Project Inspire. Okay. Any ideas, thoughts? Yes, sir.
Loneliness.
On the right track. Brilliant. Loneliness is on the right track. Think about Project Inspire. Yes, ma'am.
Disconnection.
Also, all the right ideas. I'm looking for one word or a synonym of one word. Who said that? Give that man a shaitel. Brilliant. The number one pain point of Gen Z is nihilism. No meaning and no purpose. So I wanted to really test out this thesis. I spent some time with Jordan Peterson. I spent some time with, I think, the leading people in the mental health space. And I said, here's the theory. Here's the theory. The theory is kids are locked into these little screens. What happens after a while, they reach a point of anomie. If you know the work of Emil Durkheim, anomie means there is a breakdown in barriers, there's a breakdown in values. They cannot differentiate between the virtual world and the real world. When everything breaks down and people are at the same time walking around like zombies, because we know this because we're creating the content. The whole purpose is to create stickiness of eyeballs. The longer you stay on an app, the longer you stay on the screen, the more chance I can cross-sell you and make money from you. What that's doing is, if you understand how these things work, is it's neutralizing the frontal lobe, the cortex, which deals with critical thinking. So these kids are zombies. One more piece. Recently, I'm not even going to say this because you cannot even mention this name at a Project Inspire convention, but there's a very well-known music mogul who's now sitting behind bars, who was a household name. I grew up in the music business. He's took down, and I work in Hollywood, he took down many pop culture icons. So listen, so I want you to think what's happened here contemporaneously, okay? You've got these kids walking around like zombies, no critical thinking, and a conscious degradation of anything spiritual, no meaning in their life, okay? Relationships, it shouldn't be called social media, it's anti-social media. It compounds loneliness, and then you've got their so-called icons, the people that they look up to, they've fallen off the pedestal. So these kids are in a lot of trouble. I'll explain this all before the standing ovation as to why you guys in this room have got a job to do, because this is the space I'm in. It's a generation there is a mental health tsunami that's going to hit this country, which is going to be scary. Okay, those of you who were here last year, I want to just quickly pick up from what we said, why most people are not happy. 4 major reasons that most people are not happy. And I'm not going to go through, it's clear that most people are not happy. If you want to speak to me after about the results of the Pew Report. Okay, number 1, the first reason why most people are not happy is most people conflate fun and happiness. They are completely different things. Fun is Six Flags, popcorn, roller coaster, vomit. That's fun. But when you walk down the aisle, like I did about a year and a half ago, to walk my beloved daughter down to get married, and a tear wells up, is that a tear of fun or happiness? What's the difference? What's the difference between fun and happiness? Very good. Happiness connects with an neshama. Happiness has a spiritual connection. Fun is ephemeral. It's transient. It's something that is here today, gone tomorrow. Most people are focused on that. I have never in my life, I said this in my TED Talk, I've never in my life until I came to America heard the concept of have fun. Okay, the British world doesn't talk about having fun. So what is pop culture telling the world? Go out and have fun. The idea of something that's meaningful, the idea of true happiness is lost on this generation. Point number 2 is the preamble of the Bill of Rights talks about the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit. The operative word is the pursuit. So on a subliminal level, this entire generation thinks that happiness is something that you have to go out and seek. It's not the Torah concept. You don't go out and seek happiness at all. Happiness, how many times have I heard, Rabbi, I'll be happy if I get into Harvard, if I win the lottery. It's a very scary thing. If are the middle two letters of the word life. If you translate that into Lashon HaKodesh, the middle two letters of Chaim is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. You've got millions of kids waiting for if I get blue checked, if this happens, as opposed to the idea of there's something intrinsically good about me, and happiness is not in that state or in that state, it's in the state of mind, which we'll explain momentarily. Third reason why most people are unhappy, and this was the theme of my TED Talk, is that somehow pop culture has erroneously told the world that a happy life means a pain-free life. There is nothing further from the truth. If anyone walked in here, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if anyone walked into Project Inspire 2025 with no pain, no peckle, I want you to speak to me privately, because you're in Gehaktetzoris. The Gemara says unequivocally, very clearly, if you go through 30 days of your life and there's no pain, it means that in a metaphysical, spiritual concept, it's a tzimtzum. It's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu's taken a step back and said, Gesundheit. It's a horrible thing. Pain is part and parcel of what the Almighty made. If you look at the Gemara, what's the pedagogical example that we learn about in Shas about pain? It's the birth of a child. 9 months of gestation, the pain. But what do we have to show afterwards? The Almighty is telling us that pain is not something you neutralize. Pain is not something you mute through substance abuse, through drink. The pain is the price that every single one of us is going to pay for greatness. You're not going to be a good father. You're not going to be a good husband. You're not going to be a Talmud Chacham without pain. I'll give you the example Chazal cites. Parents in the audience, what's the source of arguably one of your biggest joys in life? Children. What's the source of one of your biggest pains in life? What does that tell you? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Chazal are telling you that the things that really are going to be hit the neshama and not be fun but be happiness, it's going to be painful. If anyone in this room, it tells me that they have never ever had a situation in their marriage where they wanted to take their shaitel and throw it at the husband at 80 miles an hour, you should speak to me privately. The idea that pop culture inculcates into people that a marriage is a place of happiness and bliss, and there's never one time in your whole marriage where you say, what was I thinking? How do we know that that's true? Look at what the Meforshim say about Avram and Sarah. That's the pedagogical lesson. They were completely different personalities. Shalom Bayis doesn't mean bliss and every single thing that you say to your wife, she says, yes, sweetheart. Shalom Bayis means in spite of different genders, different cultures, different backgrounds, you're able to have a repository for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Shekhinah can dwell with you. Marriage is hard. Raising children are hard. The Western culture has told people the exact opposite. I was fortunate to go to Oxford University and then went on to Harvard Law School and Harvard Business School. I can tell you I learned zero wisdom. Zero at the Ivy League schools. And that's the bastion of tertiary institute of education. Because wisdom is found in the instructions for living, in Torah Chaim, which we're going to discuss. What's the fourth reason why most people are not happy? This I get all the time. Rabbi, you don't understand. I mean, they told me to come to Project Inspired. I got to hear this Rabbi Gordon guy, whatever, but you don't understand. I'm waiting. I've got this relationship which is so dysfunctional. And people tell me I can't even focus for Shabbos. I'm worrying about this cheshbon and that cheshbon. So everyone in this room, ladies and gentlemen, has a storm. And we all have a storm in our lives. And when people tell me, Rabbi, I'm waiting for the storm to subside. And when things calm down and the rainbow comes up, I want to start living my life. There's nothing further from the truth. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has told us very clearly, we're not in this world to wait for the storm to subside. We're here to dance in the rain. Every single one of us has a peckle. Every single one of us has tough times. What's the real definition? And part of what we're going to get into about happiness is the greatest people that we look up to. Maisa Avasim Labanim are people with resilience, with grit. It's not, you have no control over what's thrown at you in this journey called life. But the test is how you respond. And if you look at the matriarchs and the patriarchs, they had brutal lives. On Friday night, why don't I bench my daughters that you should be like Jennifer and Cindy? They went to an Ivy League school. Their parents have got 3 houses in the Waldorf and 17. Because that's not why we're here. We're not here for Disneyland. It's a terrible, terrible thing that the Western culture and pop culture has trained most people what's called the pleasure principle. That we're here for pleasure, we're here to have a huge amusement park. And then one thing happens and the curveball happens, they look heaven-bound and they say, what happened here? So that's not the reason why we're in this world. So the 4 reasons why people are not happy, we just went through. We said, for those of you who came late, that the Harvard study basically said it's all about relationships. So here's what I want to do in the time that we have together. I want to talk about the 3 most important relationships that I want you to think about. It'll change your life. It'll change the way you look at Project Inspired. And without question, if you focus on some of these ideas, and I've done this many times, it's going to hopefully jettison a lot of erroneous myths that are in your mind's eye, because we live in the Western culture. None of us are impervious to the shtus that gets poured in our heads. Relationship is between yourself, relationship with Hashem, and then relationship we're talking about your significant other. Those are the most important relationships in your life. Let's talk about the relationship you have with yourself. Who's arguably one of the greatest personalities in the whole of Shas? Most famous Baal Tshuva, started learning when he was 40 years old. So Rabbi Akiva is known for many things in Shas, but the notion of love your fellow like you love yourself. People don't understand, it's bifurcated, it's in 2 parts. Love your neighbor, love your fellow as you love yourself. What does that mean? What's the innuendo? What does that connote? Beautiful. And when you flew here to hear an amazing speech and there was turbulence, what does the steward say? Where do you put the mask on? Yourself or your kid? You have to put the mask on yourself first. Because if you pass out, then what's Shmuley going to do? You have to love yourself. So I was very fortunate my whole life to have a very close relationship with the late Dr. Rabbi Twersky. So he wrote a book on self-esteem 87 times, by his own admission. Unbelievable understanding of the concept of self-esteem. Why? Because most people don't understand what self-esteem is. The only way to build up self-esteem is to do esteemable acts. It's the tape in your head. It's the self-talk that ruins you. How do I know this? That subliminal voice that's in your head that says, you schmendrick, you loser, that voice in your head, we're going to jettison that today. I can tell you one of the occupational hazards of being involved in the Kiruv world, speaking in many things for many years, is I've counseling a lot of kids, a lot of young males that are going through a pornography addiction. Do you think that they're happy with themselves? They're filled with shame. They're filled with busha. Because they understand on some subliminal level that I am allowing an animalistic instinct to supersede pureness, manashoma. So that's how we know the subliminal talk, what you say yourself, that's going to pull down your self-esteem. So whatever the subliminal talk is about your body image, about failing, about inabilities. One of my talks is about failure. There's no great person in the Torah, and there's no great person for that matter in the secular world that hasn't failed. People misunderstand what it says in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that a tzaddik falls 7 times. He has to, she has to, because we are all strongest in the broken parts. It's an absolute fact, ladies and gentlemen, that life breaks all of us. To quote Ernest Hemingway, we are strongest in the broken parts. I want to tell you an interesting thing that I did. My brother's a nuclear radiologist. Obviously a person who's seen tons and tons of... So I asked him, everything in the physical world is used as an example for what happens in the spiritual world. He told me that's 100% true. That the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created like any bone, if you bust a bone in a certain part, the way it meets together, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, obviously there's a certain kind of chemical. The chance of breaking exactly like that is almost impossible. Because at that point of break, You are stronger than any other part of your, and that's a pedagogical lesson for all of us. Who started Alcoholics Anonymous? Who started, Mothers Against Drunk Driving? There's so many examples. Who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving? A woman who had 2 children, Rahman al-Islam, that were killed from drunk drivers. Who started, how do we even start Hatzalah? If you look at the founders of almost every organization, it's pain, it's something that was sent in their life, and they used the stumbling blocks as a stepping stone. That is the idea. So, firstly, the concept of understanding that there are 7.4 billion people in the world. Out of the 7.4 billion people, 0.02% are Jews. And out of the 0.02%, at best 10%, understand why we're here in this world. So do you understand that the people in this room, the Gemara says clear in Sanhedrin, every one of you, it's rough, but you're the diamonds in the rough. And every person in this room is the people that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is handing the baton to ignite a light in a very dark world. The fact that you wake up in the morning and you have been endowed with a gift that is the most sacrosanct gift that the Almighty can give to anyone, a Yiddish neshama. It's not stamazoi. You could have been Joe Smith in Cleveland, a farmer. But you're a Yid. Did you understand the spiritual DNA of a Yiddish neshama? You intrinsically have value. So, firstly, the concept of your relationship with yourself. But I want to take that I want to try and give you some tools. What do I get this often? Rabbi, what do I do? I'm so hardwired with my parents, my so-and-so, who stuck in my head, I'm a nothing, I'm a Nebuch, I'm a Shem. Why can't you be like your sister? I've heard. So it's very hard to do this because this is usually a full-day workshop that I do called the cognitive triangle. I want to just teach you the basic tools of a cognitive triangle. The cognitive triangle works as follows. There's 3 components. Thoughts trigger emotion, and emotion will trigger your behavior. Okay? Thought, emotion, behavior. It's so much so that I can tell just by the intonation and the way a person speaks whether they are harboring certain negative thoughts in their mind. It changes your physiology. So if the thought, in the domino theory, if the thought is the first trigger, and if you think something negative, if you're renting space in your head by that voice that says you're a shmendrik, or by something that you're fearing something, it's going to mean that for Project Inspire, you pay $27,000 for every piece of ice, and you're going to be ice mensch, and you're going to walk around. So what out of the 3, what should we focus on? Because it starts the chain of events. Your thoughts. So we're going to block the thoughts. So I'm going to tell you some rules for the rest of your life. Whenever you find yourself with that voice or thinking something negative, you cannot engage in that discussion. There's a kuntras about the 7 tricks of the Yetzer Hara. One of the most important tricks of the Yetzer Hara is he's going to start planting seeds in your mind because this is Project Inspired. It's gewaldig. You can have a geschmack time. He wants to share that. So just before we come to Shabbos, he's going to start planting seeds. If you start engaging in that voice and start arguing, so to speak, with this proverbial, fictitious, you're finished. You never engage with the Yetzer Hara. You supersede that with something positive. That's why I started this discussion today by saying, think in your mind's eye for 30 seconds of an image of something when you're really happy. Keep that image. Whenever that negative thing supersedes it, you can't engage in it. He's got you then. Okay, you have to supersede it, and we'll go into some ways on how you can do it. How do I know I'm right? Because what is the thought is machshava, and besimcha are the same gematria, same oisios. Machshava is what is the trigger of simcha. That's why with the notion of if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. We represent a lot of professional athletes. I think I told the story last year. There's an Olympic swimmer, Michael Phelps, who you might have heard of. The most decorated Olympic athlete of all time. If you watch Michael Phelps when he was in his prime, what he used to do was he used to have a headset, he used to walk up to the diving board, and he used to close his eyes for a few seconds and boom, he was off. So obviously he's listening to lectures by Rabbi Gordon. Then he walks on to so we asked him, what is it? What's that? He said in his mind's eye, there's 2 things. He's got a positive mantra. which I can teach you some of the most effective positive mantras. And then in his mind's eye, he sees himself hitting his hand, hitting the wall a few seconds before anyone else. It has a real physiological reality. It's part of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us. That's why the Alter Rabbi said, Tracht gut soll sein gut. It's here. So much is here. So the idea of having self-esteem and loving others, you first got to love yourself, and just know that every single person in this room is so beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He loves you. If Hashem had a fridge, your picture would be on it. Okay, this room are handpicked. Okay, next. What's the difference between loving yourself and being obsessed with yourself? So here's a beautiful thing. Several years ago, a person sent a letter into the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. I'll give you the exact letter. Quote, I need the Rebbe's help. I am deeply depressed. I pray and find no comfort. I perform the commands but feel nothing. I find it hard to carry on. The Rebbe said there's something brilliant. All he did was he replied and he ringed the first word in every single sentence. Every single sentence starts with I. So by definition, if you're preoccupied with yourself, that's the first ticket to depression. The first ticket to depression. That's why Viktor Frankl said that the door to happiness opens outwards. If you are, I know so many people who are scanning all the time, emotionally scanning. Is that okay? The more you can let go, let God, to use the vernacular of the so-called big book, the more that you can be in motion, because emotions come from motion, the more that you will not get stuck in this perseveration. That's depression. Okay, so that's the person talking about yourself. Let's talk about the most important relationship you're ever going to have in your life. So I'm giving the whole thing on marriage. So I'm going to only give 2 points that I want you to take for the rest of your life about marriage. Hold on to your shaitel, because I can tell you right now, this is not what you're going to hear in the Western world, but this is emes amito, and most people don't really think that this is not true. You cannot change your spouse. You can sit here and tell you cannot change your spouse. If nothing else, you can go home now. Project Inspired Train. Shehir Hamala. The most, after, I don't know, hundreds of counseling of couples, when I hear, but Rabbi, he does, you shmendrik, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you the exact neshama to be masak, and that's a tikkun. You're trying to tell Hashem you're wrong. The whole purpose of marriage is for you to grow and for you to refine your midas. Obviously, you're not going to get a clone of yourself. You can never, ever change your spouse. However, if you change yourself, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the ish le'ishto is that you will mirror. Unless a person is a psychopath or is a pathological machashefa, and we can talk about that, if you do what you're supposed to do to your wife or husband, they will reciprocate. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wired us. But don't you dare try and change them. Because what you do if you try and change them is the 3 C's kick in, which you should absolutely get out of your lexicon in marriage. What are the 3 C's? Criticism. There is absolutely no upside in life. Is tough. If your husband or wife comes home and they get a musa shmooze for 40 minutes, it certainly doesn't create the environment of a safe haven, right? Criticism is out. Number 2, don't compare. How many times I'm in the middle of a marriage counseling session and I hear, but why aren't you like Rochel who are dated? I feel like taking are you out of your mind? Don't you ever mention another person to your significant other. Chazal said it very clearly. Once you say Harei at Makudesha, you have to assume that's your bashir. That's it. I have in my life young people within about 7 or 8 months of marriage. Maybe this is just an LA thing. I would say 50% of the time, I get the call, Rabbi, I have to speak to you alone. I know exactly what's coming. I meet them at Starbucks, and I've got the script. So, Rabbi, I married the wrong person. I'm telling you, 50% of the time, there's a lot of people. Why do they say we married the wrong person? Because here's another guarantee I'll give you. I guarantee you, anyone who's single here, you will not marry the person you think you're going to marry. That is a part of the plan that HaKadosh, because this is the antechamber. This is a spiritual gym. You're supposed to work on yourself. And if you think you're supposed to marry Christy Brinkley with a shaitel on, and you let... Firstly, who you think you are? And secondly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows you better than yourself. He knows that in 16 years from now, you're going to have a child that... Every single trait and quality of your spouse is perfectly choreographed for you in the Shama. The reason why we do this is that the Western world has bought into this, the idea of preconceived ideas is very dangerous. It's preconceived ideas about marriage. It's also preconceived ideas about life. I've been doing this for a long time. I don't know how many times a person comes to the podium afterwards and says, Rabbi, I mean, this wasn't supposed to happen in my life. I mean, I didn't order this child. I didn't work on this idea of a business going bankrupt. I didn't know. I guarantee you that there are moments in your life where you are going to proverbially look heaven-bound and say, this wasn't supposed to happen. You're supposed to learn two lessons from that emotion. Number one, we're not in control. HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, He runs your life. And number two, get out of your head. Get out of your head for the rest of your life asking the question, why? We were trained in many years of yeshiva, in training. Don't answer the question about the Holocaust. Because firstly, it's extremely insensitive. And secondly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us. He told Moshe Rabbeinu very clearly, while you're in this world, trapped in this thing called the guf, you're not going... How can a mortal understand an immortal? How can a being trapped inside time understand? So you don't say lama, you use the same etymology, you say lamar. To what end? Now that this has happened, to what end? What is the reaction that I'm supposed to do? What am I supposed to learn from this? He loves me. He adores me. When you wake up in the morning, people focus on modeh. Focus on the last two words. Rabbi Munasecha, I have faith in you. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I have faith in you. The way the world works is if your mission is not complete, you don't leave this world. I don't understand what happened, but Gene Hackman had to leave this world. People have to leave the world. From our point of view, it's how many times do I see people being Menachem Oval, and it's very, very hard, and people don't know what to say. When people say, so how did it happen? They mean well, it's irrelevant. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the exact same time, I remember I was part of the Va'ad with Rav Solomon Zatzal in Lakewood. So I asked him a question. I said, Rav Solomon is the Mashgiach of Lakewood. Let's take 9/11. The plane is heading towards the World Trade Center. Am I correct in saying from a Torah Hashkafa that every single person who was meant to be in the building that day was in that day? He said 100%. I'll tell you a true story. Some of you might have read the book. I know this because it's a South African. There's a South African guy who started a yeshiva in Israel for very, very handicapped children. Why? Once again, because Rahman al-Islam, he had the nisayon of very handicapped children. He started teaching them, and they absolutely blossomed. And Gedolim said, you've got to teach this to other people. The Israeli government gave him a building, and they said, here's the condition. They gave him a date, which happened to be 3 days after 9/11. And they said, you need to give us $500,000 and it's yours. This guy's never raised money in his life. He can't negotiate out of a paper bag, and he comes to America. He's told, and you might put the dots together, that there's 2 South Africans in the World Trade Center that were options traders, and they made a fortune of money. Said, listen, you're a South African, they're a South African, give it a shot. The day before 9/11, I know this firsthand, the certain rabbi who needed $500,000 went to made an appointment with them, got to the 77th floor, and he said, this is going to sound bizarre. I've never raised money before in my life. I have a number of handicapped children, and I've been told that it's a good thing to open a yeshiva. The government's given me a requisition for a plot of land, a beautiful building. I need $500,000 within 48 hours. So Warren, one of them, said, hold on one sec, Rabbi. 2 guys, Warren and Russell, went to the back. They came out and said, I'm in for $250, he's in for $250. But you know, the problem is, Our controller's not here. Can you come tomorrow, meaning 9/11, and pick up the check? He arrived in the lobby. We had 7 or 8 floors there at Morgan Stanley, so I know the building well. He arrived in the lobby at 9/11, at the World Trade Center. Now, the 78th floor, it wasn't so, that's when the plane hit straight at those 3 floors. He called up to Warren and Russell, I'm back here, to pick up the checks, and they said, Rabbi, it's not Bukovic that you should come, but we're going to come down and see you. They went down the elevator, and the plane hit. Talk about tzedakah saving your life. Nothing by coincidence. Okay, we spoke about yourself. We spoke about your spouse. How about now the most important relationship, and that's your relationship with Hashem. Simcha. In Tehillim it says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. Everyone focuses on the simcha. Ivdu means it's work. Happiness is work. You want to have a good marriage? You want to be a good parent? It takes work. There is the idea of lefum tzaraga, the idea of putting in the effort, and Hashem did that for a reason. We work with clients that are worth billions of dollars. One of the highest forms of delinquents are children of multi-billionaires that get a trust fund for $100 million. He has the keys, he has the geld. What do you think they feel about themselves? What would happen if there was a graduation at Harvard Medical School, and 2 guys, Gary and Larry, were graduating from Harvard Medical School, and the next door neighbor, Sam, sees them with cap and gown and says, where you guys going? We're going, this is the big day. It's gown, cap, jacket. This is me. Sam, why don't you come with us? It's Geschmack, Cambridge, blue skies. It's wonderful. You'll see all the Schwitz stuff at Harvard. So Sam schleps along, and they're going through the graduation, and suddenly they're at a point where they're up to the G's, Sam Goldberg, and they say, and the next candidate is Sam Goldberg. And he looks at this is nuts. He just was the next door neighbor. And everyone's pushing him, and he ascends up the stairs. He goes to the dean. How does he feel at that moment? Absolutely like a clown. What's the idea of something for nothing is one of the reasons why tonight, on Friday night, we never hand people a piece of bread, ever. Why? No one wants a handout. No one wants bread of shame. If you see what it is, it's a custom which is now evolved into halacha, is that people will cut the bread and they'll leave it on the table, or they'll put it on a plate, but they will never hand you a piece of bread. That's the reason. To take away a person's dignity. That's the reason, my friend, when you're bringing up your children, one of the best ways that you can instruct your child is say, Shmuley, that's below you. That's beneath you. In his mind's eye, he will always think, my parents taught me at this level, this is a deviation from that level, but he won't hear Shmendrik, you nothing. Before my kids got married, there's still a few to go, I went to one of the biggest people in this generation, and I said, before my son, my daughter walks down the aisle, I want to whisper something in their ear. They'll remember it for the rest of their life. This is the thing that my tati told me before. What can I say that'll have a profound effect for the rest of their life? Everyone says, I love you. It's very interesting. So someone who everyone in this room would, without question, respect in terms of their Torah sagacity, but they also understand of human nature, said, Chanan, whisper in your son's ear or your daughter's ear, I believe in you. What happened when Yosef was about to commit the crime, the violation with Ashes Potiphar? What is the image he saw? His father. If you know that your parents believe in you, of course they love you. But the idea that I will not, how can I face my parents again? Every year I participate in a thing called Rabbis Can Run to raise money for Olami. So one of the people behind it is Rabbi Kellerman. So I've spoken to Rabbi Chanan about this a lot. He has a son that went through a very, very hard time. This son, he nicknamed the son during his formative years, 5 or 6 years old, Kadosh. He grew up in terms of being kadosh. Kadosh, I think he was about 13 or 14 years old, came for, I think it was a gap year or a camp in Eretz Yisrael, and he was dying to go to the restroom. His bladder was, he was dying. So he said to the bus driver, this is crazy. Please, can you just, the next stop, I have to go to the restroom. The bus driver kept driving. He said, this is the only place I can think of. He drove his car, the bus to the side of the road, where there wasn't exactly Bnei Brak, wasn't exactly Unzera in the area. It was a disco bar, and he had to go to the restroom. And he stood by and he said, I can't go in, man, I'm kadosh. I'm kadosh, how can I go in here? You have no idea the power of semantics. You've got no idea how powerful it is to know that your parents... So, I don't want to be too out of line. The person who I mentioned before, very big YouTuber, is now engaged to a South African woman. You literally cannot make this stuff up. So I got a call from him, and he said, how do I deal with a certain problem? And I said, I think you should do X, Y, Z. You know, I'm friendly with Ben Shapiro. Let me get Ben on the phone. Ben agreed with me and said, let's get on a plane and we'll go speak to Ben, because he handled this very well. We're on a plane, we go sit down with Ben and other people in Daily Wire. And then she said to me, Mrs. Big Schwitzer, said, can I ask you a question as a rabbi? So she obviously Googled, I don't know what she did. It's crazy. This is a Gentile South African Afrikaner. Okay, I'm now giving hadracha to, this is insane. So putting feel on steroids. She said to me, and this is amazing. She said, what do I do? I'm about to marry this guy. She's the last gold digger. She didn't even know who he was when they first met. She said, I'm a very religious Christian, and I know this for a fact. I'm very involved in spirituality, He's struggling with his spirituality, which I also know. So I said, Hashem, Habrachmon, just put the words in my mouth. This is crazy. And I said, and straight from Hashem. I said, and this is true, I see it all the time. I said, as a general rule, people who have a dysfunctional relationship with their father have a tough relationship with their father in heaven. And this person has a horrific relationship with his father. Because that's the first example of a paternal kind of figure. If that's not a warm, protecting thing, it's very difficult to think of your father in heaven as anything but that. Okay, so we said the relationship with Hashem. The number one thing that is causing a tsunami in the mental health world is people have no meaning. They have no idea why we're in this world. It's another discussion in and of itself, but it's a conscious decision to take God out of the equation. It's very, very conscious. It started with my former classmate at Harvard Law School, Barack Obama. It started with him, but it's a conscious thing. Right? To take religion out, and it's all, the psychology of this, and this is not the time and place, is the idea of you have to be somech only on the government, and the government's going to protect me. So if you take religion out, there's only one way that's seen as this benevolent hand. It's a very subtle thing. But most of these people don't have a meaning. They don't know why they're in this world. Do you know how many times I've stopped people and said, let me understand. So after you're in this wooden box and you're eaten by worms, is that it? That's it? They won't let themselves think. Okay, so the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, as the Rambam talks about, and it's in many Sfarim, is that there is no way that a person can possibly have a healthy life without the understanding of a meaning and why we're in this world. It's absolutely impossible. We all know the story of the prisoner who was put in prison for 20 years, and the warden said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn this handle, and this handle is connected to a hose pipe, which is connected to a certain well at the bottom. And while you're doing this, the well is churning and it's purifying the water. And we sell this bottled water by the millions to kids in Africa. You have no idea what you're doing. Every single day, this guy was cranking this little handle. And the last day of his 22 years, the prisoner said to the warden, I've been cranking this thing for 22 years. Can I just have maybe one of the bottles? And the warden said to him, what are you talking about? I was completely kidding. There's nothing on the other side. And he dropped dead. The idea that there's no rhyme, that there's no reason, that's one of the reasons why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created for enough people in the world an NDE, a near-death experience. I'm not going to get into too much now. A near-death experience, a classic NDE, and it's, if you look at the work of Ian Stevenson or Raymond Moody, if you want to really get into this, your neshama levitates out of your own body. Flatline. Okay, the EKG is flat. and you can see everything. So if you really want to get into this, one of the most famous cases, which I've met people in the family, so I know this to be true, was a woman who was blind, flatlined, meaning clinically dead. She looked down, she saw the doctor, she heard the doctor say, "Oh my gosh." When she came back, she described the color of each of what the doctors were wearing. She was blind. The neshama doesn't have faculties like we do, right? The idea of an NDE, I'll tell you a personal story about myself, which is not, I didn't levitate, but between graduating and commencement at Harvard, it's about 6 or 7 weeks. Between finishing and then the hat and gown or whatever mishigas they give you. So in that period, I think, I don't know why Hashem does everything, but I think Hashem said, this Gordon guy, we got to knock him into shape. So I was misdiagnosed with cancer. I was 24, single, my whole family's in South Africa, zero support system. So the call that I fielded, which is the worst bedside manner I've ever heard in my life, where the person says, "Is this so-and-so?" So obviously I thought the IRS, I lied, but then I realized it was a doctor. I said yes, and they said, "We think you have a Yenamachla," not exactly a phone call you want to field. So for 23 days, I was in my head contemplating meeting my maker. It's absolutely real. So there, my kids know this, and my friends, everyone knows. I had such clarity. It's so clear when you're put in a situation when you're absolutely preparing to leave this world. There is the perspective and the sharpness is unbelievable. My kids scratch their car and everything. It's a joke. It's a piece of tin. I don't get to say, but I understand at least somewhat of the idea of there's a rhyme and a reason. We all know the very final destination. No one in this room is going to get around the Chevra Kadisha. But people in this room that understand that the Torah is not an antiquated, old-fashioned story about two zebras going up. It's the instructions for life. What that means is the Western world says you live and learn. It's the most absurd thing. In the Torah world, we'll say you learn and you got to live. Using the GPS analogy, what does it mean? You just recalculate a lot less. You don't have to go through 47 marriages to figure out what a marriage is. The idea is it's all there. It's all there from psychology, how you're dealing with it, how do you overcome adversity. It's all there. Unfortunately, the average American boy stops at the age of 13 and a girl 12. And even then, they think that it's Bible, it's all. They don't understand. They think this Charlton Heston ascended up a mountain with sandals. It's the most insightful understanding of why we're in this world. So I want to summarize where we are. We started off by saying, I think the topic was, if you take the Harvard study, why are most people not happy? So I started by pointing out there's 4 reasons why generally people are not happy. They conflate fun and happiness. Fun is in the body, happiness in the neshama. Number 2, people say if this happens, if that happens, which means that they're going through life with a handbrake up. I said that if is the middle 2 letters of the word life. If you have the middle 2 letters of the Lashon HaKodesh, Chaim, if you have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're never alone. I then said that people think that a happy life means a pain-free life. There's nothing further from the truth. I pointed out if you go through 30 days without pain, it's very clear in the Gemara that it's not a good sign. The Rambam says the biggest, most painful thing is indifference. If Hashem just, daven, hin, cracks, whatever, that's the most painful thing. And people don't understand that Hashem is absolutely 100% has complete control over what's going to happen in your life. And finally, I said we're not in this world to wait for the storm to subside. It's an optical illusion. We're here to dance in the rain, which means every single person in this room has got something that they could talk about or worry about. There is no such a thing as a quote-unquote a perfect marriage. I live in Hollywood. I deal with the biggest stars in the world. Get that out of your head. Marriage is a petri dish. It's a repository for growth. Obviously, there are going to be challenges. You love your kids more than any being in the world. Love is not an emotion. It's a byproduct of giving. The more you give, the more you love. And that's why Chazal say, as a general rule, parents will always love a child more than the child love the parents. It's from giving. It's from giving. I then went on to talk about that the Harvard study in one sentence said that the things that make you most happy, makes you the most happy are not things, they're people. It's about relationships. That's one of the reasons why you're dealing with the most depressed generation of ever. Why? Because they're lonely, they are social media is anti-social media. They don't have relationships, and their whole life is about, do you think that was good? LOL. Or you come to shul, JFK, no, just for Kiddush. That's not a relationship. They have no social, the whole social skills is gone, which has made the amount of social anxiety is off the charts. They haven't flexed that muscle. We then talk about the idea of, okay, if it's about relationships, if that makes you happy, there's two things. You got a relationship with yourself. We spoke about self-esteem. We spoke about the fact that you got to draw the line before you obsess about yourself, because that'll cause perseveration and depression. We said the most important person in your life is your spouse. We said two things. Number one, that don't try and change your spouse. And the biggest gift you can ever give your children. There's no bigger gift that you can give your children than Shalom Bayis. We then spoke about the relationship between yourself and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the fact that every person in this room is a tiny fraction of the world population that understands. We understand that there's vicissitudes. We understand that there's pain in this world, but we understand that there's that benevolent, altruistic God who loves you more than you can even fathom, that is mapping this out for your good. And if you don't understand in this world, we definitely will. When there's patira, just means a separation between the body and the soul. So I will say the following, and then I'll take questions, and that is, it's an amazing vantage point that Hashem put me in. It's crazy. I mean, we represent some of the most iconic names on planet Earth. Athletes, celebrities. I wish happiness on everyone, but I can tell you, I know these people very well. They're dysfunctional people, by and large, they're miserable. Again, I'm not wishing this on people. I left the practice of law. One of the reasons that drove me out of the practice of law is my very first case as a lawyer. I didn't know what was flying. I hadn't even put my degree on the wall. My very first case was representing Janet Jackson. So Janet wanted to do an African-American version of A Star Is Born as a movie. I found myself speaking to Janet's brother's lawyer. So Janet has a brother, you guys wouldn't know, Michael Jackson, probably not, right? So Michael Jackson's lawyer was John Branca. I became friends with John Branca. John said to me one day, come to the house. One Sunday, I said, John, I'm kosher. What am I schlepping? He said, just come, just hang out. This is in the 90s. Everyone who was an anyone was in that room. Michael, Prince, everyone. I think I've told a few people before. I don't think in my life, under one roof, I've ever met so many unhappy, dysfunctional people. After 20 minutes, and believe me, I've seen a lot in my life, and I'm very unjudgmental. It was so palatable, and I'll give you one more story. Last Sukkot, I don't know why this always happens to me. I went out for dinner with Bill Gates. A lot of shilas, Sukkot. You know, I had to have a certain kind of food. The cameras are rolling. I don't lie. There's no reason for me to lie. The guy's sitting on $103.2 billion. I mean, for this crowd, it's not real money, but you know, most countries' GDP is not even close to that. This guy is a zillionaire. There is unequivocally no question. I had dinner with one of the most miserable, sad, depressed people I've ever met. And I think what triggered it was he saw me. There's no bush. I get these food wrapped to me, and it's all wrappers, and I'm very proud. He started telling me he had such charota that he blew up his marriage. He said one thing often, and it's very clear if you in the people's business, you can recognize the fact that he wasn't skipping and doing somersaults. So it's very clear that it's not going to come from wealth. It's not going to come from COVID. It's at the end of the day, it's going to come from your relationships. It's going to come from if you have to take one piece with you, is you should remember the following. Avram Avinu was speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? The first patriarch was speaking to the Almighty. What happened was 3 malachim came into the tent. What did Avram Avinu do in the middle of a conversation with Hashem? He said, hold on, just 1 second, I'll be right back. And he went to be mishtatef in the mitzvah of Hachnachas Orchim to say to the... So what is that teaching us? There's one thing, ladies and gentlemen, that's even more important than speaking to God. And that's being like God. And so I guarantee you, and guarantee is a very, very powerful word. If you focus on other people, if you focus on trying to make other people's lives a little happier and a little healthier, you'll find that the energy that you've been preoccupied with yourself will dissipate. If you understand that it's absolutely impossible to have gratitude and be depressed. So here's the exercise before the standing ovation. I want you all, from now until Purim, not too far, from now until Purim, okay? I'm guaranteeing this live on Torah in time, okay, in front of 3.2 billion people. From now until Purim, all I want you to do, and if you can't afford a journal, I will pay for a journal. All I want you to do is wake up every single day, and I want you to write 2 things that you're grateful for. 2 things that you're grateful for in terms of your life, okay? So I want you to do this from now until Purim, okay? Then I want you can quote my name. I want you to say to your spouse, if they're not here, or say to them when you leave after the crowds rush the stage, I want you to do the following from now till Purim. Also not a long time, okay? From now till Purim, I want you to do 1 thing that you love about your spouse every day, okay? I guarantee you, and I've done this a lot, when Purim comes, Purim is supposed to be one of the happiest Chagim of the year. You will dance, you'll do somersaults, because what you're doing is you're reacclimating your mind's eye to understand that how much we've got to thank the Almighty for, and secondly, the old patterns of thinkings of what you're missing, you're going to recalibrate that into things that you're grateful for and things that you love about your spouse. Do this without even thinking. If any of you comes Erev Purim and it doesn't work, call me, sue me, do whatever you want. That's how. This is Chazal speaking. This is not me. So I wish for every single person a wonderful Project Inspire, a wonderful Shabbos. Have a happy, healthy, and gesundte life. Welcome to Project Inspired.